This tutorial continues covering Chapter 8.4 of the book Spring Boot Quick Start. More precisely, we will show how to implement Open Projection Interface. Projections were already discussed as an introduction to this chapter, where it was said that projection interface is used to retrieve only some of the properties of the entity. These types of projections are known as closed projection, but in this tutorial we will be talking about open projections, which actually return all of the properties of the entity, and then these properties are used to calculate certain value, and then this projection will have getter methods only to get this calculated value. So this is demonstrated in this tutorial that we will cover in this video. In order to specify an open projection, we again define a getter, but this time we will annotate our getter. The name of the getter doesn't have to correlate with any property in our entity. So for instance, this is our person entity with following properties, and none of the properties are named full name. This is because here we want to use open projection, and for open projection we need to create a getter with a custom name, and then this getter can be annotated to define the value that the getter needs to return by using this parameter as a parameter to this annotation. So this expression here is known as SPEL, Spring Expression Language, and allows us to combine different properties of our entity to return calculated value. And in this case, we want to return first name. So we want to return this string, which is created from the first name and the last name, and which is why we have decided to call this getter full name. Just like in the previous example, our person entity will have this custom constructor, which will allow us to more easily load test data into the database inside this load persons class that implements command liner, which will be executed when the application is started. And here we are defining our finder method that it should return a person projection defined here. So Spring Framework will create a class that implements person projection, and then this finder method will then return an instance of that class that implements person projection interface, and that class will have this getter, and it will be implemented in such a way to return concatenated first name and last name. So now inside our controller we can implement an endpoint that uses this finder method. So first, in this endpoint we will use person repository, which was injected by auto-wired annotation, to find person entity with this name. Then this finder method will return an instance of person projection interface as defined here by us, and this instance will have this getter method. We can now use this getter method to get the full name, and then we will print it out in the console. at the end, our endpoint will return a person projection instance, and it will be displayed to us in a JSON format. We can test our application by using Google Chrome web browser and entering URL of our endpoint, which will return this JSON string that actually represents properties of person projection instance. And our instance only has one property, full name, as defined by us with this getter. Additionally, in our console, we will see following string, which was generated by this code, because in this code we are using our getter from the interface to get the full name, which will be concatenated from the first name and the last name of the retrieved entity, and then we are displaying this full name to our console. And in our console we will also see the select statement, which was generated by our finder method, and here we can see that our finder method has actually retrieved all the properties of our entity and not just those that we were interested in. Therefore, when using open projection, we are not reducing the number of properties which are being retrieved by the finder method, but we are simply defining through this projection interface some values that we are interested in and which are calculated from those properties that were retrieved from the database.